Greetings. I'm Helena Cobban, the president of Just World Educational, a small but feisty nonprofit that works to build the informed public that's needed here in the United States if we want to build a more just and sustainable world. I am also the founder and CEO of Just World Books, a small publishing company. Today, we are delighted to be launching a very special and timely book, Women Surviving Apartheid's Prisons, a profile of 4 courageous heroes of South Africa's freedom struggle, whose names were until now sadly little known even inside their own country, let alone here in North America, where millions of us still take inspiration from the smart and protracted struggle that our sisters and brothers in South Africa waged against the vile apartheid system. In today's programming, you will meet the author of Women Surviving Apartheid's Prisons, South African journalist Shanthini Naidoo, who is with us from Johannesburg to tell us about the journey she made to meet and understand these 4 now aging liberation heroes. Shanthini, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Helena.
Also with us is Denver-based journalist Donna Bryson, whose career as a foreign correspondent culminated in her service as the South Africa bureau chief for Associated Press. Donna wrote her own book about racial issues in South Africa, which was published in that country. And more recently, she wrote a powerful foreword to Women Surviving, which really helps to situate it for American readers. Donna, it's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Hello, everyone.
I am thrilled that we're able to launch Women Surviving Apartheid's Prisons at the beginning of Black History Month, and at a time when it seems large numbers of Americans of all ages and races are now eager to understand and dismantle the stark racial inequalities that still persist in our own system. So now, one of the biggest treats of today's program is that we also get to meet the Honorable Nomaindiya Mfeketo, who is South Africa's ambassador here in Washington, D.C., a former mayor of Cape Town and a longtime political leader who was a grassroots organizer in some of the youth movements whose steadfastness helped to topple the apartheid system in the early 1990s. Ambassador Mfeketo, it is a deep pleasure and honor to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Helena. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's just wonderful. I gather that you've had a chance to read an early copy of Women Surviving Apartheid's Prisons. I wonder if you could share with our attendees and viewers your impressions upon reading the book.
Yes, thank you very much, Helena. And thank you to, Shanthini for writing the book. Definitely reading that book, for me, it made me confirm what we're always saying about, in particular, when women who've been detained, how much the publicity is made, just the respect and recognition of what women are going through during that time. In most cases, now with a free South Africa, you don't get much of what happened to them. Yes, Helena, we are talking about 7 women, including our icon, Winnie Mandela. But there are hundreds, thousands of people who died for this freedom, who suffered for this freedom. But you hardly get them written about what happened to them. So I'm hoping this would be a reminder to many South Africans to revisit one of the special history that we are here because we're standing on the shoulders of those people who pave this way for the freedom we enjoy today. So even my own story, I keep on saying when I retire, I will write my story. So, and you know, it's something that needs to be done. It's something that needs to be known by communities. And at the moment, I think we're still in a situation where if men do something, even if it's not extraordinary than the one that was done by Winnie Mandela or any other woman, the publicity is not good enough to put that woman in a space. Thank you very much, Helen.
It's so great to hear your own personal view on this. And I'll also quickly share with our attendees that the ambassador recently recorded a video in which she recounts some of her own experiences in the anti-apartheid struggle. And I think she will soon be making that video available to Just World Educational, so we can put it onto the online resource center on women in South Africa's struggle against apartheid that we are continuing to build up on our website. I can't wait to see the video. Now, just before I hand over to Donna, who will be moderating the discussion with the author and the ambassador, I have a couple of quick housekeeping things here. First, I urge all of you who have not yet done so to buy the book. It is now available, starting today, wherever fine books are sold. Second, I urge you all to keep open the chat box here if you're with us by Zoom. My colleague, Amel Zaroug, who's an essential part of our team, is with us behind the scenes and is posting lots of useful links and background information there. We can share the record of the chat box with all attendees later, so you'll have all those links in one place. We will also use the chat box for any questions you may have. Just put them in there directed to all panelists, and Amel and I will stack them up to deliver them to the on-air panelists when we get back to the Q&A section. Also, I'm about to shut down my camera, so you won't see me on screen. But Amel and I are both still here, lurking in the background. If you have any technical questions, just shoot a message to me or Amel in the chat box. So now I shall hand over to Donna Bryson to moderate today's conversation. Donna, it's all yours.
Thank you. I think by moderating it means I'm going to put Shanthini on the spot a little bit. I'd like to start by giving you all a chance to hear some of the book in her own words.
Sure, Donna. So I'm reading from one of the early chapters, and it explains something. There is an anomaly in the book and in the story, which is a true story, that I share a name with, or similar name, with one of the women who I've interviewed. So I've written, "You will, I hope, have noticed my name, Shanthini Naidoo. Let me say at the outset that this is purely coincidental, not a literary device as one of the early editors thought, that I do share a name or a derivative of it with Shanti Naidoo. There's no bloodline between us of which I'm aware, but the connection of our names provided coincidence upon coincidence. Shanti is retired now and lives in Johannesburg. She returned to South Africa from the UK after 1994, which was when South Africa became a free democracy. She's one of the reasons why the story found me, and I'm glad for it. Joyce Sigekane Rankin agreed to speak to me almost by mistakes, or perhaps charmed by the confusion about her friend with a similar name. And the same for Joyce's children, who thought I was a great-granddaughter of their mother's good friend, whom they hadn't met. For Nomaindiya and Marita, it was a memory trigger, hearing a name from a story they hadn't revisited for many years. And the coincidence brought a unique way into their homes and minds. For this, I'm thankful for a name that's been mispronounced all of my adult life. That connection binds me to Shanthini Naidoo in a way that's inspiring, but mostly because she lives her Shanti, peace, more than any other human being I've met.
Lovely. And many things stood out for me from that passage, but you say that the story found you. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you mean by that.
So I came across this story about a trial from 1969 around the time of Winnie Mandela's passing. I was writing for the Sunday Times in South Africa about her time in solitary confinement in prison. She'd spent 491 days in prison, and we'd known a little bit about this, but I hadn't realized that there were 7 other women who were part of that trial. 2 had passed on, and the other 4 were still alive and still in Johannesburg. And in fact, they attended her funeral, but very quietly and very, without any fuss or any recognition. So I looked for them and, got to know them a little bit in terms of writing those articles at the time of Winnie Mandela's death, and realized that this was a whole story to tell. There were 4 life stories that could be shared very similarly to Winnie Mandela's. And at the time, Donna, I don't know if you were still in Johannesburg then, but it was also a time that Winnie Mandela's memory was not, it wasn't told as clearly as it is now. It was with, as the ambassador said, was with a male gaze without considering the mental health aspects of her time in prison and her activism. And I thought if she had been so affected by her activism over 50 years, which is, it's 50 years ago, 5 decades, which is a really long time to dedicate yourself to a cause. And I thought these women would have had similar experiences, especially looking at the solitary confinement and how, how harsh it was for them simply standing up for their beliefs and trying to get to a democratic South Africa.
I think these are stories that you found that are going to resonate with readers, women everywhere in the world. And I don't want to draw too many parallels, but I am interested. Here in America, we hear this phrase, "This is not who we are," after eruptions of violence, such as the January 6th attack on our Capitol. I don't recall hearing that kind of sentiment in South Africa after events such as the attack on the World Trade Center. I was in Johannesburg then when white extremists stormed the World Trade Center, a conference center outside Johannesburg. The leaders were negotiating the end of apartheid. Do South Africans say something similar to "this is not who we are"?
I think definitely so. This is part of the positives and the negatives of the new democracy that South Africa is experiencing. It's still new. It's less than 30 years old, so it's relatively young. What I wanted to say about the feeling of togetherness we call Ubuntu in South Africa, and it is, I am because of you. And I think it's a similar sentiment to, what's happened recently in the US, where people stand together for something that they believe in. And in our case, it was most definitely our country. But I think, this is why I write in the book that the democracy is flawed. And that part of the flaw is that we don't know our history as well as we should. And therefore, we don't recognize each other yet. We haven't gelled in that way, which I think Americans now very pleased to see how Americans on the right side of history stood together and, and made their voices heard. And whilst we have definitely done that in South Africa during the apartheid era, we still, I think, struggle because South Africans are still trying to to live as a united country. It's maybe something that's an ideal that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, but we definitely have a lot more work to do.
Shanthini, if I could just jump in a moment. People are asking you to be a little closer to the microphone.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
And I see, Madam Ambassador, you're still with us. I wonder if that's the question you'd like to weigh in on a little bit, the parallels or the lessons that we can share between our two countries.
Yes, no, sorry, I didn't even hear the full of what Shanti was saying. I'm terribly sorry. I think something broke here and I couldn't be there. Yeah.
I was asking whether you see parallels between our two countries' experience of democracy, attempts to perfect democracy and perfect unity.
To some extent, yes. To some extent, yes. I mean, you'll appreciate I was only here from March, and the bulk of what I saw was the Black Lives Matter, and which, in my view, was in fact much more than we would do in South Africa. I'm saying much more because I saw a group of everybody in America, black, brown, and white, young and old, standing up for a good cause. And I think in these short 27 years that we've been what you can term as free, yes, there's a democratic government and all that, but I think because of inequality and lots of other things in South Africa, you still cannot bring together in that, time that, what happened to Floyd, and immediately the next week, there was a strong movement that clearly changed, the views that people have. Yes, others haven't changed, but we're sitting in our houses crying, remembering what was happening in South Africa and how South Africans responded.
Shanthini, I'd like to bring attention back to your book and give us another little taste of people who haven't bought it yet. The more they hear, the more they're likely to want to run out and buy it. So please give us another little passage.
One of the women surviving apartheid prisons is Marita and Zanga, who is now in her late 80s. She was detained for over a year, or nearly 2 years as well. And she still lives in the house that she shared with her husband, Lawrence, in Koma Road, Senwane, Soweto. And she says, in the country right now, we've never lived like the way we are living now. We've got lives. We wanted our dignity back. And she dismisses any consideration of psychological help. I didn't have any counseling. I only went to a doctor when I felt pain. Or if I didn't have tablets, I still take tablets. She gestures to her forearm. If you see my arm where I fell after she was dropped onto bricks and fell onto a gas pipe, I could feel the pain. Sometimes I could hardly pick my hand up. It's painful. Nowadays, I'm tired. People think we don't want to associate, but it's because of these sicknesses. All of that comes from detention without trial.
Yeah.
You maybe share a little bit of what the questions your research raised in your mind about the impact of trauma on detainees and their families and their communities. And are there ways you see this trauma still shadowing South Africa?
So this is part of the reason for it. Actually, the women surviving apartheid prison started out as a master's thesis. It was I was studying at Wits and actually changed my thesis at the very last minute to to go and research this topic, and the topic was the mental health impacts on women who were part of the freedom struggle and also who were detainees, and centered around this child particularly. So there was some talk of Winnie Mandela and post-traumatic stress disorder. And you know, mental health, although it's such a big issue and it's said to be one of the biggest issues we're going to have in our world by 2030, you know, that would be more prevalent than any non-communicable disease even. Mental health is so neglected all over the world, but particularly in South Africa. And I thought, if someone who was such a huge figurehead like Winnie Mandela had untreated post-traumatic stress, what about the other women? And what does that mean for our society today? And it's this is why the book Women Surviving will resonate with anyone in any part of the world, is because it looks at how generational trauma affects us and um, affects the generations that come after the people who are physically affected. So that means the children and the grandchildren of these women who are our friends and colleagues. So it was to highlight, you know, how we interact with each other every day, to realize that we don't know each other's history. And in a country like South Africa, where we've had particular trauma, and in the US, you've had 4 years of trauma that you've just come out of. So it's how to interact with our fellow human beings based on our histories, and that's part of why this is so important in terms of Black History Month. Even, you know, do we know the stories that came before us? And that was the purpose of the work.
Madam Ambassador, perhaps you'd like to add some perspective here on the impact of trauma and how it can be addressed.
I think at some stage, a TRC was established at home, which I'm not sure if it was done yet. And part of establishing that was to deal with the trauma of what happened over a long period of apartheid. I must say there are people who went to testify about that trauma, and those who were responsible for that were called to the TRC as well. And it was on the basis of not only hearing the story of people, but also being able to see if the perpetrators of that must be arrested or must be forgiven, because we are reconciling, and you know, those people who were affected were also saying, I forgive you. But I must say, there are lots of people who didn't attend to that. The trauma was so overwhelming. Yeah, they couldn't. I didn't go, even myself, because I wasn't sure what would happen after you go to the TRC and open your soul. And what is going to happen after that?
Really, it's a privilege that you would share that with us. And I do think that sometimes just being able to tell your story, even just being asked, can be a step toward healing. And I know that, Shanthini, you mentioned that the officials misspelled Nomaindiya Mfeketo's name in the court records. And I'm sure that added to the difficulties you faced bringing these stories to us. Can you tell us about some of the other challenges you faced?
No, Donna, as a journalist, you would know one of the first things you do when you interview someone is to get their name correctly recorded. So to have activists and people who are part of our history not have their names correctly recorded in the government annals, it says a lot about how our activists were honored and remembered. And although there were, numerous awards, the TRC was a long and a lengthy process. If I can give you an example, the women in the story got between a few minutes to 20 minutes to tell their side of the story. The main torturer, if I can call him that, that's exactly what he was, an apartheid security branch captain, didn't appear ahead before the TRC. He lived on a Mandela government pension until he died. So, there was to find that a name was spelled incorrectly was, like I say, symbolic. It shows that what we don't do as South Africans, and what we probably don't do in many parts of the world, is recognize those who came before us. And it's actually set out in the South African Constitution that we should always honor those who fought for our freedom. And it's just not done. There aren't records because they were destroyed during the apartheid era. And then many stories have been forgotten because people, like you saw how it affected the ambassador now, they haven't shared, they haven't told their stories, they haven't been asked as well, which is why it was a real privilege to write Women Surviving Apartheid Prisons, because it gave although it was representative of many activists and of women who've sacrificed for causes around the world, it shone a spotlight on this particular trial and these particular women from 1969.
I feel that Shanthini and Madam Ambassador both touched on this a little bit, the why of why these stories are not more widely known. But is there anything you'd like to add to that question? Why aren't these stories more widely known?
Yeah. No, I think what happened, we move on with trying to make sure that the liberation that we're saying we are experiencing after 1990, the release of Comrade Mandela, I think there was a lot. If you expect those stories to come from activists themselves, it would have been difficult. It was supposed to come from government, which they did with the TRC. But I think, maybe if we thought of Shanthini and that at that space, and there was an informal, maybe informal process that is done by organizations themselves, political organizations themselves, recording what happened to those they see as their people and other people. Maybe everybody would go and tell their stories. But I think we were sort of overwhelmed by this new era, and most people were put in different places, to prepare for the new South Africa, more than telling your story, which, it's, when I look back, I think these are things that were supposed to go together at the same time.
Very wise. Shanthini, you want to add anything to that?
I also think that there's humility and so much discipline in the generation that fought in the apartheid struggle. They were it was very selfless. It was not as vocal and as visible as activism is now. So it was, and also it was illegal for them to write anything down and keep records of their work.
Yeah.
So, which is a real pity. But at the same time, we've got to think about young people. Why don't young people ask these questions now? It's something that, you know, it takes a certain level of introspection and maturity to want to go and learn about where we come from, what our our values are founded on as a country, as a world. Even though this is a South African story, who are these brave women that we are talking about? It takes another brave young person to go and ask those questions. Yeah. So until they ask, they will not know. And I'm hoping this is part of the reason, and I really appreciate, I must say, to Helena and her team for taking women surviving apartheid prisons to the US, where I think it's so valuable right now for such an inspirational time in your country as well. But for these lessons to be shared and to know the sacrifice and to know the work that goes into freedom, it will make young people appreciate it a lot more. Then you can have a young poet speaking at an inauguration of the first Black female vice president. So yeah, it's about wanting to gain that knowledge which is out there.
And I think sometimes when we finally are mature enough to ask those questions, the people we want to ask are no longer with us. I'm glad that you stepped in. Can you tell me a little bit, I'm a mom too, I know that you are. What have you learned from these women that you want to be sure your daughters know about their country's history?
A lot. Like I said, I wasn't particularly a political journalist. I did a bit of social justice work, but I went into the story expecting when you know there's a good story and it's something that's worth telling. But to go into the details with them, it just really put me back into those shoes that 50 years ago, and to feel a little bit of what they went through, and to appreciate it. It's done exactly what the purpose of the book is. So when someone reads Women Surviving, they must be able to identify with the bravery of this woman, and to also learn about the sacrifice. And I think that's very, I really appreciated many South Africans saying how they didn't know this very sort of recent history of ours and who these women were. No one knew their names, and yet, they were played such an integral part of our journey to freedom. So, in educating myself and my girls is, I also managed to get a book out to educate other people about our history.
You in Women Surviving Apartheid's Prisons, you quote leading anti-apartheid activist Kathy Caprada, lamenting that his partner Barbara Hogan had not told her own story of incarceration and struggle. You mentioned that Joyce Sikahani Rankin has not finished her memoir. I hope she does soon. And Madam Ambassador, I hope you get started and get yours done soon as well. Yeah. And I hope, Shanthini, that your book inspires women to tell their stories. What else do you think can be done to get these narratives out there? And once they have been told, what can be done to make sure the world pays attention? And maybe both of you, Madam Ambassador and Shanthini, would have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
It's difficult. I mean, a book of this nature really should speak to all of us, including Barbara Hogan, myself. Not long ago, I was just talking from what Helena wanted, talking about my life. I didn't include the periods I was detained, both in state of emergency and Section 29. And when I lost a 16-year-old son then, the way those security branches, just told me plain blank that I killed my son by being so irresponsible woman, staying for almost a year in prison without my children, when I knew they had something to do with that accident and the killing of my son. So I think it's how we've been trained that, you don't get arrested to come back and write a story about that. We will talk about them. People who are nearer to you would know about that. Maybe we didn't put emphasis into people writing about other people when something happened. And it becomes difficult to learn it later. But I'm hoping, I'm hoping at least the new generation, and as people read these books, we will get into that culture of writing about, even no matter how small something is, writing about it in order to educate other people.
Donna, sure, Ambassador, I hope you will one day, I know it's a difficult thing to do, but to one day just start and do it in small pieces. There's no other way to do it, because you can't do it all at once. It's very, very overwhelming. And I really hope that there will be more recording of many more stories. It's up to us as writers. It's up to young people to go and ask even the people around them to, who might have had a different experience, of the apartheid era, and to go and explore it. And it doesn't have to be, everyone's story doesn't have to be entirely as written as a book. It could be a part of bigger projects. And I think, though, that there's definitely an appetite for female stories. And it's also to recognize and realize when you've been a part of something as big as the apartheid struggle, which was many, many years, decades long, to realize that those different parts are very important. And I think that's something that people don't think about. I met Dr. Matthews Posa recently, and he was also very involved in the exile movement in Swaziland. And it's not just, Dominic Tweedy's on here. He always reminds me, as difficult as these stories are, they're absolutely brave, and they're absolutely interesting, exciting. They were really vibrant times that this was all playing out. They were, their stories of espionage and gun smuggling and all sorts of things that were going on, which are interesting for people to hear about. It wasn't just this dark, awful time. It was, but there was a spirit there, which obviously triumphed in a very big way, which is why South Africa is free today. So, yes, these stories will make you cry and make you think and make you reflect, but they're also, wonderful stories to tell, which are part of it, and love and life. Joyce Sikakane Rankin's story is an absolute wonderful love story as well, about how she was put in prison because she was engaged to someone she wasn't allowed to be. And in the book, in Women Surviving, you will read the story about how she eventually, fate changed that narrative for her. It's a very interesting part of the book. So, there's a lot to tell, and some of it is really hopeful and really brave and exciting and interesting. So, it doesn't make for solemn reading, all of it, which I'm very glad to say.
Yes, crying, thinking, reflecting. There's some catharsis there. And definitely a wonderful book, and I think a wonderful time for me to spend some time with both of you. But it's time for me to stop being the monopolizing the conversation. I know lots of people listening have questions, and I'm going to hand it back to Helena to bring some of those forward.
Well, thank you so much, Donna, and all three of you. I mean, you just bring so much to this conversation, and Madam Ambassador, I'm particularly moved by you sharing your story for the first time, it seems, here with us, and your pain and your strength. And I just want to acknowledge that. We do have some wonderful people in our audience today, including a member of our board at Just World Educational, Dr. Alice Rothschild. And we have two people who are family members of women, at least two family members of women featured in the book. Dominic Tweedy, referred to by Shanthini. And I asked Dominic if he wanted to come on the and appear live, maybe with his wife Shanthini Naidoo, but I don't want to embarrass him if he doesn't want to do it. And the same with Vikela Rankin, who is the son of Joyce Sikhakhani Rankin. And if they would like to appear, that would be really wonderful. We have two people who provided wonderful endorsements for the book on the cover and on the inside. One is Bill Fletcher Jr., who was the head of Trans Africa here in Washington, D.C. and nationwide here in the States, which was a key organization in the anti-apartheid solidarity movement here. And also Gwendolyn Zohara Simmons, who wrote a lovely endorsement of the book, who is a veteran Shiro heroine of the civil rights struggle here in the States. And she's recorded some of her memories of the civil rights movement. We should put that somewhere onto our website. I think it was done by the Library of Congress or someplace. But anyway, Zohara has a couple of questions, and I'm going to put her online if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, allow to talk. Okay, Zohara, Gwendolyn Simmons, could you, Amal, are you able to help me here? Oh yeah, there you are. They're wonderful to see you. How are you?
I had no idea that I was going to be shown. I thought you meant my voice, but hello, everybody. So wonderful to hear you all and to have read this wonderful book. I too played a small role in the anti-apartheid struggle here in the States by being active, by demonstrating, etc. So I am just thrilled to get to see and hear you all. One of the questions that I had raised, because right here we've been fighting to get our female sheroes names in the pantheon of those who fought to bring freedom to us here in this country. So I know what you're going through. And I think you've already spoken to this somewhat, but I wanted to know what was being done to honor these women and give them the recognition that they so deserve, them and all of the rest of you, because the ambassador is certainly one of those women who also are part of that pantheon of women freedom fighters who must be recognized. Thank you.
Well, I guess that's a question for the South Africans. It's either Shanthini or the ambassador.
Well, I think Shanthini started doing it. And I'm sure she said earlier when she speaks, we need to talk to the youth. We need to question these things. And as much as there's so much that is happening, but I think we mustn't rely, because I think part of it is rely on the political organization thinking because the government is giving awards, recognition awards every end of the year and that. So there's not much that needs to be written. Yeah, I think it's us who need to motivate the younger generation to, because they will learn from those lessons. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Shanthini, do you have something to say on that?
I think the ambassador said, you know, articulated it really well. It's a lot of, I don't want to call it work, because then it seems like an effort to do, but it should be how we've got a lovely book, which is comes from the States, I think, but it's a bedtime storybook called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, which my daughters read as well. And it, you know, it goes through history, you know, back to Helen Keller, even until today with the Palestinian rapper that they talk about. So there is work being done, but I think there's a lot more. And you know, I have a wonderful opportunity here with women surviving being available in the US, but the many other stories, it's about storytelling and sharing. And as much as it sounds like something that is frivolous and you know, not significant, it's been proven to be a form of healing trauma particularly. So the more stories we share, the more we tell oral histories, yeah, we've got to just do it. And I think as women, we, you know, if the stereotype is that we like to talk, let's talk.
So now we also have, we have Dominic Tweedy, who's going to join us. Hi, Dominic. Dominic is the spouse of Shanthini Naidoo, featured in the book. Dominic, could you turn off your, turn on your microphone? Great. And tell us how you are. And Shanthini Naidoo, it's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We're very fine. Greetings, Ambassador. Greetings, Shanthini.
Greetings.
And everybody else.
Yeah.
I would just like to say it's very difficult to do this thing of recording. We've been trying for many years. I would say that for us, for the Naidoo family, for Shanti, and the people mentioned in the books, but I think that Shanthini has been a godsend to us, really. I must say, it's not like everybody would do this. And Shanthini is a younger generation. As she said herself earlier on, she was a journalist, a normal journalist doing ordinary stories. And she took this sort of leap, and it's just been wonderful for us. But otherwise, Ambassador was trying to say how difficult it is, because one has all sorts of things to do. The people involved after '94, they were busy. They had responsibilities. They had positions, as the ambassador said, meaning that they had to get down to work and do stuff. So there wasn't time. And then I must say, there's another factor, I believe, which is that life is very competitive. Life is competitive within politics. Within the liberation movement, it's competitive. And people are jealous. People feel they would feel that they were boasting, that they were trying to leverage their own life for advantage. They would be made to feel that. And then they're talking about things that are very tender and sensitive and personal, actually identity of them, their own personal history. Then you would withdraw from that. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't put it at risk like that. And I can see this all the time, I believe. People are either, of course, shamelessly boastful, and sometimes artificially and wrongly so. You know, we can think. Let's just say there are a lot of white people who take credit for the liberation of South Africa. You may not believe that, but in fact, they believe that it's them. De Klerk is the first one. He believes that he liberated South Africa. He's proud of his Nobel Prize. He thinks it was down to him. You know, incredible, really. So this is a competitive thing. If you go into it, you're going to have to battle it out as well. And you're going to be facing people who may want to ridicule you and shame you and all sorts of things. So this is why it doesn't come out easily. So Shanthini has done us a hell of a good service, something really special. I want to thank her for that, actually.
Thank you, Shanthini.
Thank you, Dominic and Auntie Shanthini. Please don't thank me. It's their story to tell. And in fact, Dominic is, you know, my history teacher in my late 30s, because a lot of the stuff wasn't recorded, and he's got the most amazing memory of everything that's happened, and it's important to get this all down. But I think a lot of, you know, what he's saying is correct, but I think it's also because of because men do this, male stories. You know, it's the, as Rini, who's a researcher in the UK, actually just asked in the chat, why do we think that this happens? And it's because, you know, it's called history. It's already starting to focus on the men, and so we've got to change that, especially as women. And we want to hear the women's stories. They are far more interesting.
So we have a question from our board member, Alice Rothschild, who is a physician very active in the Palestinian rights movement here in the United States and a member of our board. So Alice, if you could just unmute your microphone, it's great to have you with, and it's nice to see you.
Well, it's great to be here and to be learning more and more history. My question is, and it kind of stems from what just was said, can you speak to the relationship between anti-apartheid struggles and feminism and the difficulties for women to get recognition for their work?
Well, it's very interesting because, am I correct? Dominic can help here, but from there was a very big separation between women's movements and, you know, the main part of the anti-apartheid movement until, you know, they were sort of absorbed. And then after democracy again split up into very sort of very distinct female and male roles. And actually, you know, this is part of the I think feminism was something, you know, the women in the story in particular, you know, completely espoused. And I think it was something that any anti-apartheid activist would have to believe in and do, because it was the 60s. It wasn't even a time of, you know, of equality. So, you know, these were, so they had multiple barriers to work through. And I think we still do, we definitely still do, but this goes back 50 years ago. So can you imagine when women were not wearing trousers and you had these brave journalists and, activists who were meeting in dark corners without fear of being arrested. Or maybe they did have some fear, but they did it anyway. So yeah, it's true. The feminist movement in South Africa, I think it's still work in progress.
I think as I was reading your book, I so often thought of the idea of women's work. And that
Absolutely.
a lot of the things that these women did that was heroic was just considered what women should do, and they shouldn't talk about it. And then also this idea that there's so much women's work. When the ambassador talks about having to get busy building a new South Africa after liberation, there just wasn't time for this kind of reflection. I think women did most of the work there too. There just wasn't time. There's so much women's work.
Yep. And in the absence of partners and things like that, I actually think that the women may have held it all together. A part of the movement and outside.
Yeah. There was one time when I felt the women were very strong and were holding whatever they are doing as themselves women. And that time was, between the 70s and maybe up to 1990, when now, the unbanning of those political organizations. Now, and this was precisely because some of the organizations, women organizations that were there and fought very hard, were women who said from the beginning, and this is where the feminist idea also was nurtured. Women who were saying, we will take our decisions ourselves. We will not rely on men to take decisions for us. And I must say it worked. Many things that we went through that time, we went through as women. We didn't wait for men, whether they are in an organization or not, to guide us on what to do. And one of the things that happened, the unbanning of the liberation movements. Now, women became a league of a broader organization that have everybody, including men. And look at the ANC, for instance. There's ANC, the women's structure of the ANC is ANC Women's League. Now, in many instances, policies are the same. And also it depends on who is vocal more than who. And to some extent, it influences how that women's league need to operate and more focus and fight on women issues. So it's something at times we do unconsciously, even though at some stage we were adamant that as women, we want our own organization. Every year, we were writing our own budget as women. When the National Party or whoever were writing their budget to announce, we would write our budget as women. But do those things happen now? They don't. They don't, because we're part of the organization that have everybody, including men, and policies are the same. Yeah, thank you.
I think we probably need to wrap up now. And
Yeah.
I'm just so, I feel like I've worked on this project of publishing Shanthini's amazing book for most of the past 8 months. And now I told Shanthini, when you publish a new book, it's like having a baby. So this one. It feels like I've worked on this for 9 months, and I know that Shanthini worked on it for a lot longer than 9 months. And I know that Shanthini Naidoo and all the other wonderful women featured in the book obviously lived these issues for decades. And there were those who were inside South Africa, like the ambassador, and those who were in exile, like Shanthini Naidoo and Joyce Sefefani. And each of these was like a different situation for many years. And between you all ended the apartheid system. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for doing that and for letting me and my team here be a little bit part of this. And what a pleasure and an honor to work with the people in South Africa. So I want to just remind people that the video of today's event will soon be posted on our Women in South Africa's Struggle online resource center. Check back in with the resource center throughout the month ahead to see the new content that we'll be putting on there. And I think, yeah, Amal has just put the link into the chat box.
Okay.
So this continuing educational outreach project from Just World Educational is made available at no cost to the learning public. And Just World Ed needs and welcomes your support in many ways. Obviously, putting on my publisher's hat again, we would love it if you could tell your friends about women surviving apartheid's prison, discuss it on your social media, provide thoughtful reviews or discussions of it in all the usual online forums. This story really needs to connect with a very broad readership, and I hope that all of you watching this can help it do that. So now I would like to thank, first of all, Donna Bryson, who is with us from Denver. Donna, your participation in this project has just been wonderful. And I mean, as a journalist to a journalist, thank you so much for everything you have done for this.
Yeah. Thanks, Donna.
And Shanthini, you know, without you and your work, none of this would have happened. And you have put something on the record for the ages that maybe would never have ended up in a book. So I want to recognize your contribution, and obviously your participation here has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And finally, Madam Ambassador Mfeketo, really the spirit and soul that you brought into this online discussion has transformed it from what would have been just a very ordinary book launch into something much deeper. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Amel and Izarug and Charity Famakinwa, who have been working behind the scenes. Charity's name has been on the ambassador's video feed, I see, but that's okay. And when you leave the meeting, this Zoom, you will be sent to an exit poll. So you can give us feedback that can really help us improve our programming. So we'd be very grateful if you could fill out the exit poll. Finally, all of you on the panel and watching from around the world, thank you for being with us. Stay safe, and let's hope we can meet in person sometime soon. Thank you, and
thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Goodbye.